mothering. But Father's Day is coming next week, and many Unitarian Universalist churches close for the season on this Sunday. They don't go to the Sunday when Father's Day takes place. And I think that's a rotten deal for fathers. So I'm going to talk about them, and I invite you, if we have time afterwards, to share any of your thoughts that are triggered by the service. I'm going to start by saying that it's completely appropriate to do this today because Norbert Chopek was a very devoted father. He was also a father many times over. He had 11 children. Now, how he managed raising 11 children while starting a church in a country that had never seen Unitarian Universalism is really quite remarkable. And I'm going to leave that to the history books that have been written about him, but I am going to talk about fathering and how he treasured it, because he did. He was deeply devoted to his children. It's one of those occasions, Father's Day, when popular wisdom explodes. Here's something to consider. This is a reading from David Gottesman. Fathers, like mothers, are not born. Men grow into fathers, and fathering is a very important stage in their development. Now, I've never been a father. And I'm guessing that many of you have not been fathers. How many of you are fathers? I see a couple of fathers, yeah, and some of you, okay. And what about the rest of you? Are you related to fathers? Yes, yes. And if you did not have a father, which might have been a blessing or a curse, depending on your life circumstances, I hope that you had father figures who were present to you and available to you to do the work that fathers do for children. Fathers come in all shapes and sizes, all gifts and deficiencies. Sometimes they're inspired in their nurturing abilities. Sometimes they're bumblers. Sometimes our fathers are not there. I always ask people around Father's Day to describe their fathers and to share some of what they've learned from them. My father was an international airline pilot, so my father was not there for long stretches of time when I was a child. When he was there, he was very busy with chores, as he called them, and doing errands, and his idea of interacting with the kids was to toss us in the back of the car and drive us to the hardware store and the delicatessen, and sometimes, but more rarely, to the supermarket. He was very fond of building things, such as the stone wall and the terrace at our house. He built bookshelves in the living room, and he built me a dressing table, which absolutely amazed me. My father was a Virgo, and I say this for a reason. Virgos are known for being meticulous, for being very, very practical, for doing everything with a tape measure, measure twice, cut once, and for taking care of the things that need to be taken care of. And that is what my father did. He didn't seem to have a lot of abilities beyond that. And when he died 2 years ago, I was actually here preaching the day before I went to be with him. He died the next morning after I preached here. My brothers and my sister came to a memorial service that I helped organize, and all three of them said the same thing, that although he was considered a great neighbor and much loved by everybody for lending the lawnmower and the leaf blower and all of that, we didn't feel that we knew him really well. We loved him, but we didn't know him very well. There are many worlds contained within the word Father. I want you to think just for a moment now, what comes to mind when you think of your own father? Did he have anything in common with my father? My father would be 94 this September if he were still alive. Did he have qualities that were different? So often when we are growing up, we are looking up literally to the man who is raising us, whether it's our father, a grandfather, a brother, an uncle, a family friend. Because we are vulnerable when we are that small, we need protectors, and mostly fathers are assigned that role. Sigmund Freud wrote, I cannot think of any need in childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection. With that thought in mind, it must be very intimidating to become a father and to be a father. I know my husband was terrified when he became a father. Now, Frederick Buechner writes, "When a child is born, a father is born. A mother is born too, of course, but at least for her it's a gradual process. Body and soul, she has 9 months to get used to what's happening. She becomes what's happening. But even for the best prepared father, it happens all at once. On the other side of the plate glass window, a nurse is holding up something roughly the size of a loaf of bread. And that's when he sees it for the first time. It happens all at once. Yes, and there you are, father and child, and perhaps father and children. For Norbert Čapek, there were 5 born within the first 6 years of his first marriage. 5 within 6 years. Teacher and pupil, for whether they're deliberately teaching us or not, we are learning a lot about life from the examples of the father figures we know. Sometimes it's practical knowledge about how to build and repair things. Sometimes it's the love of a special hobby. Sometimes it's how to be a partner. Always it's something about parenting. Some of our fathers are explicit in their teaching, and it's through being their pupils that we get to know them best. But sometimes it's the example rather than the words. As Clarence Kelland once said, "My father didn't tell me how to live. He lived, and he let me watch him do it." Now, ideas about parenting have changed over the years, and in many Unitarian congregations, we focus on having safe congregations, safe places for children to be. In the larger world, that's often a struggle, and a responsible father might be described succinctly as one who waits to have children until he's prepared to, both emotionally and financially, support his child and share in its emotional and physical care with the child's mother. But that is not equally easy for everyone. Beyond those critical basics, being a father is not something anyone takes classes in. Those of you who are fathers, did you take a class on how to be a father? Did you watch the television show Daddy Boot Camp? There is a program like this that's been on TV in the last few years. We're on our own and learning from each other and the generation before us, and isn't it a pity? Wouldn't it be a great idea if we had more advanced preparation and parenting skills for both mothers and fathers? Now, one of the more complicated parts of fathering is that we sometimes unconsciously conflate the idea of father with the idea of God. Not that anyone calls Dad God, at least I don't think so, but I think you know what I mean. That's especially true if we've been raised in authoritarian homes with a hierarchy that leads to God as the commander-in-chief. It's even truer if our ideas about God are about God's parenting skills. In our ancestor religions, God is almost always understood as male. Depending on which story you're reading in the Judeo-Christian stream, God can be distant. He can be interfering, as he interfered in Job's life. He can be very creative, as in Genesis. He can be rewarding and punishing, as in establishing covenants with people. He can be testing and brutal, as in asking Abraham to sacrifice his son. He can be warlike and genocidal, as in ordering the Israelites to destroy their enemies to the last child. And then there's that matter for those of us who grew up with Jesus. What are we to make of God as the Father of Jesus? What kind of father leaves his son to such a fate as that of Jesus? That last question has haunted Christians and non-Christians alike. It's a very disturbing one. It's a question that leads many people away from Christianity. And Unitarians and Universalists are no exception. We have moved away from the Jesus Father story. Even if Jesus refers to his Father as Abba or Papa, we are left wondering what they are to each other. God is far away in the stories about Jesus. and Jesus is here on earth as a human. Our doubts are fed by various commentaries and interpretations that we've read about the meaning of the gospel stories, even if we believe that Jesus wanted his followers to love the Lord their God with all their heart and soul and might. Is it realistic to expect fathers to be gods, household gods? What would that mean? Would it mean that God knows everything? Would it mean that Father knows everything? A lot of us grew up with fathers like that, who thought they knew everything. Does it mean that Dad is never going to make a mistake? When we're little, Dad is Dad, and it takes a while to see him as a person in addition to being Dad. Part of growing up is realizing that our parents are human, that they struggle with life questions just the way we do. Sometimes it's hard to accept that and hard to accept the imperfections of our parents. Teenagers are amazingly good at penetrating their parents' defenses. How many of you have lived with teenagers? Yes, it's quite an event, isn't it? An ongoing series of surprises. Here's what Mark Twain said about it. When I was about a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was absolutely astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years. Isn't that often the way? We think of ourselves as growing and of our parents as standing still. This idea is reinforced sometimes in television programming when we see fathers who do not have a clue about what is going on. Archie Bunker was that kind of father. He was a man with very pronounced views about everything, who was willing to argue with everyone. Now, what about Homer Simpson? I've heard The Simpsons described as one of the most dysfunctional families on television. And I have to say, I think that's pretty true, mostly because of Homer, because Homer is a clueless father. Now, we get two diametrically opposed views of fathers in the media and some of what we've learned from our cultural background. The imperfect dads, like Homer, don't have all the answers. Sometimes they don't have any answers. We see this with Tim Allen on Home Improvement and with Dan, who was Roseanne's husband. But nevertheless, at the end of each episode, those fathers were usually depicted as having good hearts. I mean, deep down in the end, they loved their kids. But before you got to that, you had to wade through all the clutter of the craziness. Things may be messy along the way, but eventually they get to the good part of fathering. Maybe these fathers are in front of us as an antidote to something that doesn't really exist, the fairy tale of the perfect father. We've seen them on classic TV shows, at least if you're as old as I am and older. Shows such as Father Knows Best, The Cosby Show, The Brady Bunch, and dozens of others. These were the dads who always offered wise counsel, never lost their tempers, set limits, and could rethink a difficult situation in 2 seconds. They were moderate and not hasty in their judgments. They behaved with dignity, mostly, and allowed room for kids to be kids, even when the kids made mistakes. Even if we wished our own fathers were more like them, they seemed almost too good to be true. And I still think that if I turn on programs like TV Land and others that show old syndicated shows. But maybe they seem too good to be true, because unlike us, they had clever TV writers standing by to help them resolve disputes and raise their kids. They didn't actually have to do it themselves. A family friend recently observed that there are 2 kinds of fathers. Those who are willing to learn from their children, and those who are not. Those who are willing to learn are the ones who see themselves as people who can always learn from others. They encourage their children in their quest for maturity and independence. They pose questions and issues for their children to consider. They pass along spiritual guidance as they can. Some sociologists refer to these fathers as authoritative. The other fathers, the ones who must always know more, Those my friend called the authoritarian fathers, and they are the ones who set different kinds of limits around their children. They are the ones that many children struggle with and struggle to escape from. Here's a survey of a child's thoughts about God, and I do not know who wrote this, but I find it very illuminating. A 4-year-old, my daddy can do anything. 7-year-old, my dad knows a lot. 8, my dad doesn't know quite everything. 12, oh well, naturally Dad doesn't know about that. 14, Dad, oh, he's hopelessly old-fashioned. 21, Dad is so out of date. 25, well, he knows a little, but not really that much. 30, I have to find out what Dad thinks about that. 35, before we decide, we'll get Dad's idea first. 50, what would Dad have thought about that? 65, I wish I could talk it over with Dad once more. The life cycles of the child and the father. Well, no matter which fathers we have or haven't had, I believe that we all want them to succeed. We want to think the best of them. We want them to be there for us. We need their support and encouragement. Maybe that's where we live with our thoughts and hopes and memories of them, in the space between perfection and imperfection, in the space where we remember that they too have dreams, that they too are children, no matter how old they are. I'm going to say that again. They too have dreams. They too are children, no matter how old they are. May we remember that reality as Father's Day approaches. And may you speak to your father for Father's Day. May you remember to tell him in a meaningful way what he means to you. Good, bad, ugly, whatever it is. Speak to him. Think of him. And if he's no longer here, think of him. Think of him, and if you are a person who prays, pray for him. Amen.